Hello and welcome to the Lukex podcast. I'm your host, Dan Morrice, and with me in the studio today are my good friends Louise Glenn.
Hello.
And Ross Vardy.
Good evening.
In today's episode, we travel to Chile to meet the miners of San José, who hold the Guinness World Record for the longest time surviving underground. For 69 days, they were buried alive nearly half a mile down, with just 3 days' rations, toxic water, stagnant air, no medical aid, and no route to the surface. How did they survive? How did they get out? And what can they teach this generation in this moment? Let's find out. So, the rescue of San José. Imagine being trapped with your work colleagues for 69 days. Minimum food, constant darkness, temperatures in the 30s permanently.
Maybe some of them, but not all my work colleagues.
Okay, yeah. You can pick and choose. Maximum humidity, toxic water, chances of survival almost zero. I think that's the hard thing. On the surface, they thought they wouldn't have survived, but also in the mine, they thought no one's going to come and get us out. They knew what happened.
Dan, how long were they there before they made contact with the surface? 17
days.
Yeah, that's tough, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think initially they thought if some of them had survived, it's very unlikely they would all have survived, because the block that collapsed in the centre of the mine, do you remember how much it weighed?
No.
This was a fact in the book.
Empire State Building, the mass, twice the mass of the Empire State Building.
That is it.
Okay. I know it was 700 metres.
That is right.
High or whatever, but yeah.
Yeah. So it was 700 metres down, or 2,300 feet, or nearly half a mile, depending on which book you read. But the official book commissioned by the miners was written by Hector Tobar. It's called Deep Down Dark. And he uses that illustration, that sort of image of twice the weight of the Empire State Building. So that block dropped through the middle of a mine and it kind of triggered rockfalls all over the place. And all of them just happened to be in a place that missed a rockfall. And so when they got to the mine, then they assembled in the refuge, which was the kind of designated safe space. It wasn't that safe, but safer. But on the surface, they didn't know what was happening, so they thought it was very unlikely that they'd all survived. But after 2 weeks...
Yeah, it starts dropping, doesn't it, the chances?
Yeah. I mean, if they haven't died of their injuries, they're probably going to be gone from starvation. But that's not what happened, is it?
No, there's that wonderful moment. No. That wonderful moment where they sent down a drill and they heard some tapping on the drill. And when they brought it back up, I had a little note attached to it, which said, what did it say, Ross?
It said, "Estamos bien en el refugio los 33."
That's a beautiful accent. What does that mean, Ross?
We are well in the refuge, the 33.
Estamos bien en el refugio los 33.
So yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful moment, and I think that's the moment where certainly the rest of the world watching who were expecting a disaster, and that was the sort of hinge when not only were they all alive, but they were all well.
Yeah.
And I think on the surface, the psychologists who had been sort of preparing the families for the likelihood of death had also suggested, and I think they wanted to sort of manage the expectations of people on the surface, and so they'd introduced the idea that, if we find any of the miners after 2 weeks, the chances of them being well. Do you remember what they said?
They might resort to terrible measures.
Yeah.
So I think some of the sort of comparable survival stories have ended with blood on the walls. And so, I mean, the families were like, nah, not our guys, not my husband, dad, brother, whatever.
Yeah.
But I think some of the experts had sort of tried to say, well, people don't behave normally under that sort of extreme pressure.
Yeah.
But they were wrong. I mean, when they found them.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a scary moment because you know they're there and you know they're alive and they're well, whatever well means. But now the world knows they're there.
Yeah.
And they have to try and get them out.
Exactly.
And that's not guaranteed. So it's like the world is now watching a potential disaster unfold real time, or potentially a real story of hope.
Yeah. I mean, there's very few stories that have dominated the headlines for months that end in wholly good news.
Yeah.
But also I think there was a sort of spiritual dynamic to it that I wonder whether the papers didn't quite know how to cover that. I mean, the miners themselves spoke very much of a sort of divine providence. They talked about their prayers. When they got out of a mine, a lot of them dropped to their knees, like tears running down their cheeks, praising God. And I remember watching the news, and the channel was kind of saying, "Oh yes, very emotional." It's difficult to know how to describe something. And when they talked about how they got out, and they talked about a sort of divine presence in the mine, I don't think people really knew how to report that.
There was that, one of the newspapers, didn't it, said Miracle in the Mine as the headline, kind of hinting at something.
The Miracle of San José, yeah.
Miracle of San José.
That was the Times.
Yeah. Quite sensationalist too.
It's quite sensational for the Times, yeah. One of those days when there's very little other stories, and they get into all the sort of subplots, different miners, families, how the drill got down, various diagrams, and they kind of hinted at the idea that there was something going on here, that there was more than meets the eye, but didn't quite know how to say what that was, so kind of just left it hanging. And so I was curious, so I decided to write a letter to José Henríquez.
Oh, right.
Why Jose? Do you remember what they called Jose?
El Pastor.
Which is what?
So, well, it's pastor, but or shepherd, as like a spiritual meaning.
Very nice.
Though he wasn't.
He wasn't a shepherd or a pastor.
He wasn't a shepherd or a pastor.
He was very much a miner.
He was, yeah.
A very jolly miner.
Hence why he's down a mine.
Exactly. Yeah, that follows. So, but they called him the pastor. He seemed to have some kind of peace, some kind of leadership, which they recognised, and they asked him to sort of guide their prayers and sort of be a big father to them, really. A lot of the other miners stepped up as well, but there was something about him. He sort of recognised the spiritual moment. So I wrote him a letter through a publisher to give to someone else, I mean, I didn't actually think the letter would ever get to him, but it disappeared into the Global Post. And then just under a year later, I got an email saying, "Brother Dan, here's my cell phone number. Call me when you land." Yeah. That was it. So I called you guys.
Yeah.
And how did I rope you in?
So, despite your high level of Spanish, you felt you needed some support.
That's very generous. I don't really speak Spanish. I try.
Yeah. So, you asked me to help to communicate and translate anything that we needed when we get out there to Chile.
And everything. Yeah, there was some quite long interviews. What were you doing when I called? What was your job when I called you up?
Well, I was literally about to move to Madrid to teach English, and so I'd already had a bit of Spanish under my belt.
Yeah, you're being modest, mate.
Which proved handy.
It really did. Yeah. And how was it translating Chilean minor? Like not only the language, but also it's quite some specific vocabulary there.
Yeah, it's a little bit different, and I'd never realised how tiring it is to translate like solidly for hours.
Yeah,
which was happening, but it was surprisingly tired.
Yeah, I wasn't. I was just there, like, what's he saying, Ross?
Yeah, chatting away.
Louise, how did you end up burdened with these two men on a trip around Chile?
I basically invited myself on a wine tour of South America.
Yeah,
I heard Dan was going on an adventure, and I wanted to join him. And he found me some things to do to be helpful.
You're also being modest.
Yeah.
I think you did everything.
You were very
what did you do?
I didn't actually do. I wrote the letter. I got this ball rolling, called you guys up, and then off we went. So we touched down in Santiago.
Fit as a fiddle.
Wow. Yeah, that is a good point. I barely made it off the plane. Louise dragged me off.
I think you might have lost a piece of paper, which was quite important.
When you did lose a piece of paper that was quite important, which you apparently need to leave Chile.
Yeah.
He obviously said, "Don't lose this piece of paper," but you weren't next to me at the time, so I think I threw that away. Well, you stapled yours inside your passport.
Yeah, did you?
Anyway, you got me out of that. I mean, we made it out of Chile.
No, that's all right. I wasn't seeking further praise.
So when we got to Chile and I made out through customs, having abandoned the important piece of paper, we called Jose. You took that call.
I did.
Yeah. Off we went. Yeah. Just like that. I think maybe it is worth saying that we really had no idea whether this would come off. We had a number. He'd emailed me like a year previous. He hadn't answered since. So it was a bit like, and Jose's quite a common name. You can't really just land in Santiago and say, have you seen Jose? So we needed him to answer. And he did. So off we went. We got down to Talca. We invited him round to the place we were staying.
Yeah.
What was your sort of first impression when he came in?
Oh, he's just a lovely, warm, cuddly uncle. I don't have a cuddly uncle, but if I did, he'd really like him.
Yeah, he was really friendly, really good-humoured.
Yeah.
And was quite quick-witted.
He was. Do you remember what he said to Ross?
Oh, something about him looking fine.
Yeah. He pointed at you and said, I used to look like that once.
Yeah.
He said, I've had a few steaks since then.
Yeah. So have I.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we did. Yeah. I think that's how I bribed you into doing the trip. I said, it's a wine tour of South America. We'll have a few steaks. You have to do a bit of translation.
Yeah.
Just
a little bit.
Yeah. So, do you remember what he said? Should we have a few quotes?
Yeah. Go
I
on.
think you asked him at the beginning just how he felt when it first collapsed. This is what he said.
The explosion left us covered in dust for 4 or 5 hours as everybody arrived in the refuge. Almost all of them were very traumatized, very shocked. There were 33 people who had different personalities and values, different levels of experience, different ages. Some young people had never worked in a mine before.
That's their first day.
Day one.
Yeah.
That's not a great day one.
No, it's not, is it?
Some people have IT issues in day one.
Yeah.
Or they can't.
That's true.
Yeah, I remember a job I didn't have a computer.
Wow.
So
Other people, day one lasts for 69 days. And he said this.
As a Christian, your faith has to be proved or tested, so you walk the talk. In those moments, faith is activated. So for me, this was just another test of my faith.
It's interesting. I don't think I would remain that calm.
No.
he was incredibly calm, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. He didn't say that. It was the other miners. Do you remember later we interviewed a couple of the younger miners? And I think it was Carlos Barrio said, the pastor blessed us in an incredible way. So I think they looked to him. They noticed that he looked completely unflustered. He had this sort of bomb-proof peace despite the circumstances, and they were panicking. And they said, what, how do we have what you've got? And so he started leading prayers at noon and at 6, and he would call them together, and he said this.
Praying reconciled them with each other. I would call them back to one another, make them shake hands, give one another a hug, and request to be forgiven.
So I think, for me, that was one of the interesting surprises when we started to interview them, is that we had this theme coming up of their sort of the brotherhood. So not only were they in an extraordinary situation, it was so stressful, and yet there was a sort of peacemaking element to their role. Whenever there's a little skirmish or they disagreed about something, which they often did, someone would jump in and break it up and like, no, they seemed to sort of forge a community that was so compassionate that makes you think on the surface in our lives, which, I mean, my life is a lot less stressful than this.
Yeah.
I could probably learn something from these guys.
It's quite hard to forgive your mates if they've scoffed all the biscuits.
Yeah. So that was good point. Yeah, that was probably the major sticking point to begin with. So a few of the guys who arrived early in the refuge broke into the emergency rations, had a bit of extra. And so imagine 2 weeks in, if you think you're about to die, you're down to 1 teaspoon of tuna a day.
Yeah.
And you think, could have had a cookie. But that guy ate them.
But we haven't got any.
There was no revenge or retribution. That sort of bitterness was just flooded by that desire to forgive and to reconcile and to ultimately be a model to the world above.
Yeah.
What's interesting with Jose, he didn't step up to take that sort of role. It was actually Mario Sepulveda, Super Mario, who sort of called him out and just said, Jose, lead us in prayer. Do you remember that? And this was his first prayer. He said, he got the miners together. They all knelt down when they first realized that they were out of their depth. And he said, Lord, we're not the best of men, but have mercy on us. And we asked him about that prayer, well, you did. And he said, it was a prayer to make us humble.
Those who read the Bible know that God loves the humble, but the proud are far from him. He doesn't listen to their prayers, he ignores them, but we humble ourselves, the 33, all together before the Lord, and he answered our prayers. The living God was with us.
I remember you saying you were quite inspired by... He talked a lot about humility, didn't he?
It was a recurring theme when you talked to him. He wanted to really emphasise the point that you've got to be humble. You've got to be humble.
He actually broke down whilst... I remember he was... Because I didn't know what he was saying until you translated it.
Yeah.
But I noticed there's a point where he sort of broke up a bit. And that was that point.
Pero nosotros los humillamos. Los 33 nos humillamos allí, delante del Señor.
But it wasn't just that prayer of humility. There was also one of the first prayers he prayed was actually quite significant in their survival. Do you remember how they got water?
Oh, yeah.
With the 2 tanks.
Yeah, so they had 2 big tanks of industrial water. I think they were used for machinery or cooling or something mechanical. Yeah. And they prayed for one of the tanks of water that it would be clean, that they could use for drinking water. And then when they tested it, it was clean. Yeah. Which was quite handy.
Yeah. And the one they didn't pray for
was contaminated.
Yeah.
What did he say? He said something good in Spanish.
Contaminado.
It was a great word. Yeah. It wasn't just dirty, it was, contaminated.
After the collapse, I took on the positive role because we were okay. We were alive. We had water. We went to the water tanks and prayed that God would bless the water. We prayed that He would make it clean. Later on, when they studied the chemicals in 2 of the tanks down there, the first tank, the one we asked to be blessed, was totally clean, but the second tank was contaminated.
It's a bit crazy, really, that they'd have the faith to drink that water, but I guess they'd nothing to lose.
Yeah,
and
true, yeah.
Give it a go.
Yeah. If you're going to die anyway, you might as well die fighting. But yeah, to drink the water and then later discover that the one they didn't pray for was contaminated.
Yeah.
Well, it could be coincidence.
Yeah.
But it also could not be. It could be something more to it. And we can say it's a coincidence, but it's a very helpful one if it is.
I think that's what first sort of got me thinking about this. Like a lot of the miracles that would then follow, all of them could be coincidences. I don't think we ever want to say for definite that was divine providence. But at the same time, it's quite difficult to rule it out after when they keep coming. There's just a mystery to it, which is, well, actually the second one. I mean, I knew about the water beforehand because I read the book, but the one that really surprised me was Omar. Do you remember that?
Yeah, when he couldn't breathe. When he was struggling to breathe and he had chest pains and things.
So after Jose, in Talca, we contacted, he put us in touch with one of his friends in Copiapó, which was like 1,000 k's north. Marta Contreras, am I saying that right?
Contreras, yeah.
Very good. Yeah. Martita.
Bit more R, Dan.
And she was lovely, wasn't she? She was the
she's amazing,
head of social services of the Atacama region. And she just helped us out and told us where to go in Copiapó. Copiapó. And we ended up meeting Omar Reygadas. Lovely guy, and he walked us out to a park just outside Copiapó.
Yeah.
And do you remember what was significant about that park?
Yeah, so something he talked about a lot is just he had his last family kind of gathering or meal, picnic or something in that park. Yeah.
It's quite a heavy moment for him, wasn't it? So he had all his family together. Just before he went down the mine, he had they had a granddaughter, I think, had just been born. It was a big family celebration. And then when the mine collapsed, like the next week, he thought, I was given that last moment as a memory to say goodbye, which is nice. And he was like, it's not very nice. I don't want to say goodbye. I want to see my family again.
Yeah.
But do you remember what happened?
One morning,
I was feeling really sick due to the lack of oxygen. A strong pain has started in my chest and I couldn't breathe. I thought at that moment that my time had come to live this life, so I surrendered myself to the will of God. But then I thought, God isn't going to let me remain in the mine. I thought, it wasn't my moment to die, it was my moment to fight. So in that same place, I prayed with such strength and such faith. At that moment, a breeze came up and I even started to feel cold. I was going to mention it to one of my colleagues, but before I asked him, he said, It's really cold and there's a lot of wind coming in. I thought a drill had finally made a hole somewhere, so we started to look for it. We used a lighter to see where the breeze came from, but we couldn't find anything. The incredible thing was the air came from the bottom of the mine, where there's nothing. It's like looking in the bottom of a bottle where there's no exit. After that, my faith grew even more that God was with us.
That is extraordinary, isn't it? There's a few things about that surprised me. What was your take on it?
I find the breeze quite interesting.
Yeah.
Just thinking about where's it coming from, and is it an air pocket that's been released, has some rock fall, released some air, or is there a through draft? But it's quite odd that it's coming from the bottom.
Yeah.
And so I would love to know where that breeze came from.
Yeah.
Because it gets hotter as you go further down the mine. So that was a surprise.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's interesting. But also, where had all the breezes been before that? Why would it happen exactly when he needed
It
it?
was good timing, wasn't it? And I thought maybe, because you can start to feel cold if you're going to shock, getting a heart attack, it might just be his own physiological response, but the others mentioned it as well.
And that's reassuring,
Yeah.
I think, because he could come out of the mine and think he imagined it.
Yeah.
But actually, other people saying, oh yeah, that breeze happened. That's quite helpful.
It was remarkably restorative as well. Like, he was generally thinking, this is my final moment. His chest was tight, and then this bizarre cold breeze swept up, and then he recovered. That's all right, isn't it? He was I remember him being very, just in awe of it. Almost like, what anyone says, I don't care. That happened. It was a gift.
Yeah.
And I think whatever your explanation, you can't take that away from him.
Yeah. He had what he needed when he needed it.
Yeah.
And I think it had a big impact. He definitely realised something bad could have happened if he didn't have that.
Yeah.
He was thinking about his family a lot. Because then afterwards, when you speak to him, what he does now, it all revolves around his family.
Yeah. I'm very grateful.
Yeah, he was just like, I'm just spending all my time with my family, which is what I want.
Yeah. He was very, I think we'd expected. I'd read before we left some of the reports that were sort of 5 years on about the miners, and a lot of them were saying that they got violent flashbacks and they're traumatised by this experience, which was, to a certain extent, there was truth in that. They mentioned that they'd had sort of PTSD, but I think that was only half the story. They also had a sort of overriding sense of, but we got out and it was a gift and we get to see our families again and we're grateful for every day. I think Omar was a lot like that.
Yeah.
Interestingly, Omar also had something to say about the sort of peace and brotherhood they maintained. So it wasn't just the sort of remarkable events. There was also, he talked about how they got on as a group, how they forged that sort of brotherhood, how they looked after one another, how they learned to sort of forgive and reconcile and love one another and not get fractious.
Which is the opposite of what they were expecting above, wasn't it?
Yeah.
From what you were saying earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
The complete opposite.
But he, I thought, brought an interesting dynamic. So he said it did start to get a bit tricky when?
After the drill broke through and they were able to send little messages down on a little chute.
Yeah.
They had photos and phones and communication with the outside, and that disrupted their flow a little bit. They were obviously thankful to have communication from their families, but at that point they started to disagree a little bit more. It was a little bit more fractious.
Yeah. That was really, he almost said, because actually the first 17 days was in theory the most difficult because they thought they were going to die. And then when they got it rescued, you'd think that'd be amazing. But actually he said they just lost some perspective. In fact, I'll find you his exact words. He said,
Nowadays, a lot of communication between humans has been lost. We sit next to each other, but we are more concerned about our phones or we are listening to music. People don't talk. In those days, when we were inside the mine, people above were talking to each other. When they found us, people who had never met hugged one another, shook hands and cried. This doesn't happen very easily, so I believe God was sending a strong message to the world to say, I am here, you have gone far from me, but look what is happening. When we were in the mine for the first 17 days, real human being flourished. We were more concerned about the man to our side than ourselves. We gave thanks to God twice a day, but in the middle of it all, there is the capacity in man to forget. If it were not for the hand of God, I would still be underground.
That was interesting, wasn't it? And I remember not inviting that. We just kind of said, cool, well, thank you very much. Anything else you want to add?
Yeah.
And he had that sort of like, this is a message I want to take from the mine.
And then we chatted to Omar some more and he said, would you like me to take you to the mine?
Yeah.
We were quite excited. We're like, yes, we didn't quite expect to go to the mine. We thought seeing a couple of miners as well, that would be great. But going to the mine was quite an amazing experience and a remarkably peaceful one.
It was, yeah. What was that your sort of reflection of the Camp Hope as it was known?
I thought it was, considering it was this place where a disaster could have struck below, it was very calm, very peaceful, lots of flags flying, one for each miner. 33 Chilean flags. No, 32 Chilean flags.
Bolivian.
And one Bolivian. Flapping calmly just above ground like nothing terrible happened.
And it was quite so. Marta, when we met her, she talked about Camp Hope. So she worked there above the mine with the families, sort of coordinating, just supporting really the families by the mine. I mean, they went up there and a lot of the families were like, we're not moving, we're camping out here. And there was such a spirit of faith and joy, and they were praying permanently. But it was obviously, they were quite traumatized, but she seemed to notice that there wasn't an anguish underlying it. It was more of a faith. They were like, they're going to get out. We trust God. Keep praying, keep hoping. And they ended up calling that settlement Camp Hope. Yeah. Camp Esperanza. Go on, Ross.
Esperanza.
Esperanza.
Well, they would have said Esperanza.
Very good. One of the miners, his partner, had a daughter whilst he was underground, and they called her Esperanza. It's nice. They renamed her Hope.
Yeah.
So there was something that was going on both in the mine and above the mine, that sort of spirit of hope that was quite interesting. And I think that's the thing that I first noticed when I was reading the papers, and they seemed to suggest there was sort of prayer chains and, like you say, flags and candles, but it wasn't like people were being sort of ritualistic. It seemed when you saw the people praying, it was deep and it was a cry from the heart. And it seemed that stuff happened when they prayed. Do you remember any of the specific moments? There were some rather uncanny answers to prayer, shall we say, that José shared with us.
Someone had a dream, didn't they? Was that José himself or was it a different miner?
Oh, yes. Actually, there was another miner, well remembered, who had a sort of vision. He didn't say it was a dream or a trance. He kind of visualized the drill breaking through in a certain place. And then when the drill finally did break through on day 17, it actually swung off course on its own accord. I mean, they do deviate. They expected that, but it went unexpectedly in this direction and burst through where he saw it, which was remarkable. But it wasn't just in the mine. I mean, the miners talked about this sort of presence that kept them together. But actually above the mine, there were also, do you remember José mentioned a prophecy from Argentina?
He always uses hermano,
Does he?
sister or brother, which confused me at first. Because at one point,
a big family.
It's a huge family. And Dan was part of it at one point. But, but yeah, he talked about this sister coming over from Mendoza in Argentina and trying to find it. I can't remember his wife.
It's his mum.
His mum. To tell him, you've got to keep praying for your husband, for your son, because he's going to get out and he's going to be going around the world telling everyone about it because he's going to, God wants him to tell his story around the world.
And I think they were a bit surprised, weren't they?
Yeah. They were a bit fraught, I think, at the time.
Because
Obviously.
him getting out was not a given.
No.
Let alone him travelling around the world telling people about it.
Was he not also afraid of flying?
He was, yeah. I remember you saying
the deeper he is, the better.
Yeah, exactly.
Underground, overground, wandering free.
Yeah.
You did actually say that. I remember you sort of teasing him and saying, look, you were remarkably calm for 69 days of extreme trauma, and then you were worried about flying business class to the White House. Yeah. And he sort of chuckled and went, yeah.
Ya el Señor nos había avisado. El Señor, por sueño.
God showed us through vision and dreams the precise place where the drill was going to break through. While I was down in the mine, God was doing great things in Talca. A lady came from Mendoza, Argentina, to my mother's home to bring her a message. God told her, go to Talca in Chile and find this mother and tell her, I will take my son out of the mine and he will testify about me to the nations. I didn't want to go because I'm afraid of flying, but in the end, I went to 18 different countries to testify to the word of Jesus Christ.
No, you're right. That is unlikely.
Yeah.
There's another family connection as well. The president.
Yeah.
Sebastián Piñera. He had a father-in-law.
That's right.
Who wasn't very well. And he urged Piñera to go to the mine because the miners were alive. He was sure of it.
Yeah. That's right, yeah.
Was he a particularly spiritual man?
I think Piñera was...
His father-in-law?
We don't know, really. A lot of the miners, I think we sense that they weren't particularly religious people, but when disaster struck, a lot of people do that, I think.
Yeah.
When disaster strikes and you've got no other options, they discover prayer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think... But actually, there was something quite remarkable with Piñera. I think when you're the president, when you're in government, it's one thing to be praying quietly, by your bed late at night. But he got the whole government. He was like, right, we need to pray, and got everyone down on their knees. And we met Alf Cooper, his chaplain, Reverend Alf Cooper, who I remember he was quite surprised by that reaction. Yeah. And it was actually Alf who interviewed Piñera. Do you remember he gave us that interview?
Oh, yeah.
And he said in that interview, let me find the quote. He said, I had a conviction which I don't know how to explain, that they were alive and that it was our duty to rescue them. So actually, I think his advisors said to him, you got to leave us. This is a PR nightmare.
Because was it with his specific departments saying this is a no-go?
I think everyone.
Yeah.
Because they think the chances of them surviving were so slim, if they throw everything at finding them and it's all in the news and then they just recover a load of dead bodies, they're like, it's not going to look good for you.
Yeah.
And they'd had the earthquake earlier in 2010. They were like, you just leave this. It wasn't even a government mine. So he had no responsibility, but he just said, nope. And he said, and Alf asked him why. And he just said, I just, something told me. But actually, after 2 weeks, I think he was probably struggling to think, did I get that right? And you're right, it was his father-in-law. I'll share the quote.
It was such a long time. After 17 days, we still didn't know if they were alive or dead. We didn't know where they were. But I had conviction, which I can't explain, that they were alive and it was our duty to rescue them. So when many doubted, I kept an unwavering faith. The advisors were asking how long we should keep looking. I said, until we find them. I'll tell you a personal anecdote. The night before they were discovered alive, my father-in-law was dying, and by a coincidence, that night I stayed with him. My wife was asleep. He woke up at midnight, very ill, and asked me about the miners. He said, they are alive. I know they're alive. You have to look for them. That gave me an even stronger conviction, and I told my wife. She said, go to the mine, because this means something. I arrived at the mine, and we found the 33 alive and well.
And that's remarkable timing. It was that day. He got on the flight, went to the mine, boom, just in time.
Just in time for the note.
Yeah. And he met Lawrence Goulburn, and he gave them the note, and he shared the news with all the families. So what do we take from this whole adventure?
I think what really struck me about the story is that each individual story could be a coincidence. I don't really know where the breeze came from. One of the water tanks might have been fine. But when we put them all together, it does make me question if there's something bigger going on. I'm a science teacher, and so I like to look for patterns. And how many coincidences do you have to start thinking, is someone in control?
Yeah.
So the thing that stuck out for me was the lady that had come from Argentina to find his mother. And at that point, they knew he was down the mine, but they didn't know if he was still alive. They hadn't actually found him. And if they, then got to the point of even thinking about pulling him out. But she was talking about beyond that and saying, your son's going to get out. So you need to keep praying for him. And once he's out, he's going to go around the world and tell everyone about what's happened and tell his story. And that actually happened.
He did.
He did get out. And it's very bold for you to cross borders to go and tell somebody you do not know something like that. And it happened. So
yeah, he came to Britain. He met the Queen.
Yeah.
Seems like such a risk for that woman to take.
Yeah.
Nearly insensitive in some ways to tell someone something that's so full of hope that could go so wrong.
Yeah.
I can't remember what his state, if he said what his state his mother was in at the time, but either way, to say you're for sure your son's going to be okay, even though you know nothing about him right now.
I remember him saying, he said, that's the story that inspires me most, that sister.
Yeah.
There were others as well, other people who'd spoken to his family.
Yeah.
But I think his mum reflected that lady had a certain surety.
Yeah.
Which you're right, it could be very insensitive, and I wouldn't do it. I'd have to be so sure.
No.
But she seemed to know, and you're right, she was spot on.
And all panned out, as she said.
I also think our own journey was quite exciting. We didn't go with much of a plan, even though I quite like a plan.
Yeah.
But we had a number and we called José and he put us in touch with Martita, he put us in touch with Omar, he put us in touch with some of the other miners. And we met Alf, and I was kind of joking, we'll have the ultimate trip if we get an interview with the president. And then Alf got us one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And our own trip just felt amazingly well put together by someone outside of us.
Because we did not plan any of that.
We really didn't. We had one phone number.
Yeah.
I think for me, I was struck by the fact that there is even any evidence of something beyond our materialistic world, which we don't often hear about. I'm not saying the Chilean mine rescue was all pure miracles or that it was all purely coincidental, but it's interesting that the questions at that moment were even being asked. I wonder whether our culture has become more secular and more individualistic and more materialistic, not because that's necessarily a reflection of reality around us, but because we're only hearing the secular materialistic stories, any kind of hint of prayers and prophecies and divine providence. They're mostly sort of airbrushed out of the headlines, even before we have a chance to ask the question, is there something in this? I think our generation needs that, particularly the stories of peacemaking. I think the way the miners forged a community of peace, despite all their differences and all their challenges, the way they forged a community that was genuinely looking after each other, I think that's inspiring to the world around us. And I think peace at the deepest level, I think every culture agrees that peace at the deepest level, it's more than just the absence of conflict. Great though that is, but true peace is the presence of something, a wholeness within and between people, a sort of transcendent quality that's greater than a state of just beige neutrality. It's the presence of something beyond ourselves. And what is that? And I guess for me, the Chilean miners just awakened in me a desire to find out. Thank you for listening to the Luke X podcast. If you want to see the documentary Miracle in the Mine that accompanies this episode, you can find it at the website lukex.org, that's lukex.org, or just search for Miracle in the Mine on the Luke X YouTube channel. To read the full gloves-off account of a Chilean mine rescue commissioned by the miners, go for Hector Tobar's book, Deep Down Dark. And to read about our encounter with the miners, with Ross, Louise and myself, you can read about this and many other stories in Finding the Peacemakers by me, Dan Morrice, published by Hodder and Stoughton. Special thanks to the Chilean miners, José Henríquez, Omar Reygadas, Carlos Barrio and Alex Vega for their interviews with us on location in Chile. For Marta Contreras, am I saying that right, Ross?
Contreras.
Yeah, Contreras.
Of the Atacama region for meeting us in Copiapó, and to Reverend Alf Cooper for meeting with us in Santiago and for sharing with us his interview with former President Sebastián Piñera.
Piñera. Yeah.
Thanks to Scott McKenzie for recording this podcast and to Anne-Marie Furman for this glorious music. In the next episode, we journey to the fringes of the Mediterranean, where Europe and the Middle East meet, to interview Syrian refugees who have found faith in the most surprising of places and who are right now transforming the world around them.